Jayant is someone I admire very much, obviously the organizer of this conference. When I first met Jayant, I asked him, what are you trying to achieve with this? And he said he wanted to save Western society. And I thought, oh my gosh, I came to get Doug Casey's autograph, you know. But I commend him for all of his efforts, so please welcome Jayant Bhandari.
Thank you, Albert. I don't think Western society can be saved, but Western civilization can be saved. As Doug Casey says, the idea of America lived in America, but maybe some other society will accept the idea of America eventually. But let me talk about racism in America, which is the topic of the day today. There's 3 or 4 new personalities are rapidly emerging in the US Congress. One is Ilhan Omar, a Somalian child of a Somalian refugee parents. According to a recent interview she gave, she said that people of European origin, and of course mostly people erroneously use the word white for these people, but she said people of European origin are the most crime-prone people in America, and that they must be profiled and monitored. Now, ironically, her parents, instead of moving to a Muslim country or to another African country, chose to move to America. And no doubt, I can hardly think of anyone from South America, Africa, the Middle East, or the Indian subcontinent who, given a chance, would not move to America. Why do people move to America? Because they get more opportunities. They actually feel much more respected. They don't have to bribe the policeman. Color of your skin, your sex, your religion are at least not the officially stated reasons why opportunities would be denied. Courts are reasonably fair and your private property reasonably safe. Now, is America perfect? Of course it isn't. But people come to America because it is vastly, vastly superior to what immigrants and refugees left behind. Anyone who claims that racism of America stops him from succeeding in life is transferring responsibilities of his own failings and laziness, and is trying to make people of European origin feel guilty to extract resources from them. Moreover, there's a much bigger cultural issue here. Those people who are constantly whining and blaming others are people who have no gratitude. They don't have the concept of gratitude in their mind, and they worry about not what they got, but what they did not get. This is the beggar mentality that they have brought in from the third world country that they left behind. Now, of course, as Ilhan Omar demonstrates, bigotry against those of European origin, often called white these days, is not only perfectly acceptable, but encouraged. Such bigotry is a sign of having arrived, a sign that these refugees and immigrants are somehow superior. Of course, these refugees and immigrants have nothing to show for the superiority of their tribal, hellhole societies and their oppressive religions. In the multicultural system of America, you must approve of the regressive customs of immigrants and stand in awe of their childish art, music, and dance. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Rashida Tlaib, and Ayanna Pressley look at everything from the prism of race. None of them would have succeeded in winning the elections were it actually not for her race. In jobs, even at meritocratic companies, assuming everything else being alike, in America, it is the colored people who get preference. In today's America, while everyone is allowed to feel proud of his religion, race, and the hellhole societies that he or her parents left behind, there is one group of people who are expected to feel guilty about their race. They are the people of European origin, exactly the people who are the reason behind the grand success of America and actually the Western civilization, and for the much of the intellectual capital that humanity has today. In the land of the free, America, any accusation against people of European origin for being racist is all that it takes to destroy their career and social life. Last year in Philadelphia, a few black men were at a Starbucks. They had not bought anything from the coffee shop. So the manager, quite rightly, went to them and said, "Buy something, if not, leave." The men instead insisted on staying put. The manager ended up calling the police. I thought the company, Starbucks, would honor the manager for doing his job. Instead, Starbucks apologized, offered free coffees around the US to blacks, and ran a course of diversity for its employees. That is the degradation that is happening in America. Just last month in San Francisco, a white person politely asked a black man who had tailgated behind him into a secured building to wait outside the building. The black man, instead of politely leaving, video recorded the incident and claimed racism. Not to be left behind, CNN posted this video in their headline news. Increasingly, what I see, and I spend a fair bit of my time in the US, black criminals have a free license to do what they want. Crime, homicide rate among the blacks has spiked since Black Lives Matter came into existence. People of North European origin, in my view, from my experience of living in the West over the last 30 years, is that they are the least racist and the least sexist people on the planet. The reason why everyone from around the world wants to come to places run by people of European origin. The colored people, Muslims and blacks, prefer to have a boss who is of European origin, for this boss is likely to be more fair and generous. These people, the colored people, Muslims, black, they face animosity from the people of their own kind. Blacks from blacks, Muslims from Muslims, and Indians from Indians. But then hypocritically, they blame all their failures to white privilege. America is indeed a melting pot. And I'm just concluding, Albert, here. America is indeed a melting pot, but only for those people who want to assimilate. Because most people are tribal, US is the most ghettoized country in the West today. America, by letting this happen, has let in people who lack gratitude. They have invited people from hellhole, third world cultures, customs, and religions, and they honor these people. Particularly blacks have been given preferential treatment, and this is indeed racism. Racism of low expectations. In other words, America actively infantilizes people who are not of European origin. Now, this is the problem. This is not benign, innocent racism, what people call reverse racism. Given that, very soon, more than 50% of America will be of non-European origin. America is at the door of a disaster. Politics of America will sharply towards the left once Trump is gone. The US, in my view, after Trump is gone, which is 2 years or 6 years from now, will be the first Western country to destroy itself. Thank you. So I want to talk about Doug, introduce Doug to continue this chain of conversation. I came across Doug about 16 years back. I had just moved to Canada. I was writing for Mises USA those days, and I got an email from someone, a speculator. He said that he wanted to invite me for lunch. Unfortunately, by this time, I had lost most of my money by making erroneous investments. I was broke. I was washing dishes those days. And Doug invited me for lunch. I was desperately looking for a job. And I deleted his email because I was so angry that I write for the Mises Institute, and all I get is emails from speculators. Fortunately, someone told me who Doug Casey was, so I ended up going for a lunch with him, and it was there that I asked him for a job, and he very kindly gave me a job at Casey Research.
Okay. You know, I've got to say, one nice thing about this conference, and it's almost unique, Eris was like this too, is that we talk about absolutely anything. I think if we went out into Vancouver and they knew that we were talking about racism the way we are today, we would be ostracized, probably stoned in this highly PC city. Rakesh and Frank Peters, I thought that was a most interesting discussion, although I think they actually agreed on, they do agree on about 90% of what they were saying. They were just talking past each other a little bit, but they're really much on the same page. It wasn't actually a debate. So I just wanted to make that comment to start with. Now, talking about racism, I think it's genetic and 100% natural. Why might that be? Because as humans evolved into different groups as they spread out in the world, when one group would encounter another, if you weren't in the part of the same clan, certainly not part of the same tribe, you were probably a danger because life was solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. And if the two of you are looking at one deer and you're not part of the same clan, you're not going to, the guy's probably going to kill you. So anybody that's different from you are, the more different, the more dangerous. So this is genetically inbred. It's, I think racism is a survival instinct that arose hundreds of thousands of years ago and is basically in the gene pool. Now, from a point of view of libertarian theory, it's ideologically unsound, no matter how natural and genetic it might be. Problem with racism is that it sorts people out on absolutely the lowest common denominator. I mean, it's the lowest common denominator. On the other hand, it's still a survival mechanism, just as it was hundreds of thousands of years ago. When you're walking down the street at night in a big city and you see some young Jews coming from a chess club meeting, you're probably not going to be afraid. If you see a bunch of young blacks coming from a bar, you should move in a different direction. I mean, that's racism, but it's intelligent. It's a survival mechanism. So you can't have any possible problem with that. Another thing about racism is that deny it as you will, it has other survival advantages. One reason why Jews are so successful is because if you're a member of the tribe, you tend to you trust other members of the tribe because there's peer pressure and social opprobrium that works within that group, and you give advantages to people within that group because it's expected they'll be repaid, and outsiders are seen as prey. Same thing with Mormons, actually. They're not really a genetic group the way the Jews are, but, well, they almost are, because they're all basically the same stock. They're, famously, white kids. And it actually works in other groups, too. If you're in a prison, and I've done a lot of research, I've been in jail a couple of times, that doesn't count. But in prisons, it's this lowest common denominator thing. The fact is, in all the prisons, people sort themselves out first and almost exclusively by race. The blacks stay with the blacks, the Hispanics with the Hispanics, and the whites with the whites, okay? There aren't very many Orientals in jail, so they don't really fit into that thing. But it's true. And the fact is that, but on the other hand, the lower your social stratum, the more important race is to you. I mean, it's absolutely true what Jayant said, is that whites are, I'd say, definitely the least. I mean, it's racism. Listen, if you're a white guy that wants to move to China and become a Chinese citizen, forget about it. It ain't going to happen, okay? If you're Chinese and come to an Anglo country, yeah, it's not a problem. I mean, Africa is unbelievably racist. I mean, so I think that the whites win that particular contest as far as being the least racist in today's world. Whether that is genetic or whether it's just become a cultural thing, I actually am not sure. But it's a little bit, the fact is that there are differences between different racial groups. It's like breeds of dogs. And almost all breeds of dogs arose during the last 1,000 years, even the last 500 years. And look how different they are. Chihuahuas, Great Danes, Dachshunds, poodles. I mean, they're very, very different, and they actually have different characteristics. Irish setters are notoriously stupid dogs. They really are. On the other hand, Australian Shepherds and Poodles are very smart dogs. It's been bred into them over only 1,000 years or so. Dog generations aren't like human generations. They're about 10 times faster, roughly. So you think that in the course of 10,000 years, there would be big changes in people. And indeed, that's true. Who wins all the track and field contests, okay? The best football players. They're all from West Africa, basically Nigeria and that area. Muscular, quick twitch muscles. They win the 100-yard dash almost every time. On the other hand, who wins the long distance running more than anybody else? Well, basically, it's the East Africans. They're skinny and they're bred for that type of thing. Gymnastics. Chinese are very good at that. So these different people are variegated by their genotypes. And so there's definitely something to racism. I mean, half of the Nobel Prize winners are Jews. They're smarter than the average person. The average Chinese is at least 5 IQ points smarter than the average European. It's just a fact. I mean, the poor Africans, they're great they're great athletes, but not many Nobel Prizes, okay? I'm sorry, these are just, the facts speak for themselves. I'm sorry if it insults anybody. But personally, I choose my friends. I mean, you sort things out. You look at what somebody looks like, okay, race is one of them, what they dress like, what they talk like, you watch how they move and they act. But whether I accept somebody as a friend and associate, I mean, those are trivialities. It's basically who the person is. So I discard race on a personal basis. That's the intelligent thing to do. I mean, that's pro-survival. You use all these other indicators to sort things out and to put things in the proper compartments for use in different ways. But everybody here agrees that, at least I hope so, you choose people based upon their character. And their character has very little to do with the physical body that they're. And of course, then you get into this thing, are we spiritual beings or are we just meat machines? Nobody really knows. A lot of opinions on that. And that's part of the equation too. It gets into your possible religious or spiritual beliefs. Anyway, those are just some miscellaneous thoughts. And Rick, I know you're going to bring some more common sense to this discussion.
Well, unlike my earlier speech, I can speak with some conviction on this topic. It's amusing, and it could only happen at Capitalism and Morality or Eris, where I would be the resident bleeding heart. It's actually fairly pleasant here. Let me begin by saying I'm an old, fat, bald, white guy. Don't hold a bake sale for me. These guys are fucking crazy. I mean, truly crazy. I'm a racist, too. Absolutely racist. I expect Albert to organize conferences better than me. I expect Albert to be able to disassemble my cell phone in a refrigerator and build a car out of it. Stuff like that. I expect Jayant to dissect everything I say in that wonderful Indian way and find 1,000 nuances that I had never thought of. So I am, in fact, a racist, but a racist in a very different way than they are. The black Nobel Prize winners, the lack of black Nobel Prize winners. I'm actually honestly surprised at Doug. The idea that Western civilization gives people the ability to exceed is absolutely true. What Doug has unusually failed to notice, I think, given his ability to look forward, is that the parents of the black Nobel Prize winners are street peddlers from Nigeria. They're on the streets of Rome today. Honestly, that's where it is. The black diaspora, the people who have succeeded, that is the voluntary black diaspora that has succeeded in getting out of Africa, you see them all over the place. You see them running technical divisions of Exxon. You don't see them in Nigeria, perhaps, because as a consequence of some cultures, I don't understand, they're busy killing each other, but I digress. The beauty, I guess, of some Caucasian cultures, given Western civilization, is that we are, as you have said, welcoming. The fact that the United States will become majority non-white, assuming, as the earlier panelists had suggested, that we quit paying people to come to the country and do nothing, means that the country will be spectacular. Look at the composition of the panel. Half white, half non-white. Looks like a great recipe for America to me. More Alberts, more Jayants. Explain to me what's wrong with that. Even those four moronic congresswomen, to me, serve a useful purpose. If what you believe is that politicians should be held up to ridicule, what more could I ask for? Except perhaps Trump. Examples of racism, it's not where we look for it. When people look to racists, They look to the, the Ku Klux Klan and, By the way, it's not those peaks, it's the way their heads are. Anyway, I'll go on. To look for, I've got so many things to say here. I don't know if you guys saw me writing frantically. If you want evidence of racism, you don't have to look to the normal places that you look for evidence of racism. The BC Provincial Legislature, the Vancouver City Council, victimizing those great threats to society in British Columbia like me, charging people preferential property taxes. This is fascist, protectionist, and racist. And really, racism, overt racism, non-preferential racism, I think goes to ignorance on the one hand and fear on the other. And I think understanding racism in the context of fear is the best way to understand it, and I think combat it. The best and boldest residents in any place in the world are immigrants, people who had the guts and the ingenuity to come to a place, even if they came illegally. A guy who comes across our southern border, across the wall illegally, provided he or she goes to work voluntarily, contributes to society, they're exhibiting a hell of a lot more initiative than most of the native-born, which is, of course, what pisses the native-born off. Where do I want to go with this? Boy, there's so many things. I guess what I'm saying is that race isn't a problem. Culture has been a problem. And to the extent that we assist more people of more races in adopting the culture of freedom. I mentor a bunch of kids, mostly kids from Liberty.me, mostly in Eastern Europe and mostly in Africa. And it's so amusing talking to these young Kenyan kids on Skype and mentoring this group of 19 and 20 and 21-year-old Misian Mau Maus. By the way, they think that's a pejorative term. They think it's a white term. I thought it was a term of endearment, so I have to watch this. But the truth is that I sort of reject immediately any sort of sense that there are negative racial norms. I think there are negative cultural norms, but my suggestion is that we understand that people who seek to escape their culture and adapt the best part of our culture, and by the way, ours doesn't mean white, are people that, really we need to embrace rather than fear. It's funny when I talk to these young African kids, mostly by Skype, the African racial problem is that unfortunately Africa has adopted the worst cultural trait they could have from their colonial masters. That's Marxism. The truth is what's wrong with Africa isn't of African origin. We gave it to them. Have a look at Marx, another old fat white guy. You can't blame Africa for Marxism. We gave it to them. Now, it's been very, very convenient for these old kleptocrats. You remember George Aita at Eris describing Africa as a race between the hippos, the old, fat, entrenched bosses, and the young cheetahs. It's not about race, it's about culture. My favorite racist, I study racists. My favorite racist was Malcolm X. Favorite in many ways. Malcolm X, early in his life, was quite hostile to Caucasians, born out of experience. Despite that hostility, he effected enormous positive change in a community that at the time was subjected to a lot of overt racism. Malcolm X said, the fact that white people don't like us might be fortunate or unfortunate, but it's a fact. He said that African Americans as a group, and this was in the early 60s, constituted the 13th most potent economic force in the world. And if white people didn't want to trade with black people, that was okay. Black people should trade with black people. He started something called the Shabazz movement. And he said it's absolutely normal that white people would want to hire white people, that white people would want to promote white people, that white people would want to make white people who were their relatives richer. And it was black people's fault that they didn't feel the same way. My kind of racist. Later in his life, he decided, I guess on his conversion to real as opposed to whatever the Nation of Islam was at that time, that type of Islam, he decided, as I have decided, that the problems are cultural and spiritual, they're not racist. And he said that he had made a mistake, segregating by race rather than by belief. So in many regards, Malcolm X was my favorite racist. But the most interesting thing about Malcolm X as a racist, and he really opened my eyes, not that I've ever had this problem because there was no cultural expectation of me other than to succeed. And that's the point that Malcolm X said. Malcolm X said that the most pernicious part of racism is that people have been conditioned to think of themselves as inferior and needy. If society believes that black people or red people or brown people need a hand out or a hand up and convinces them to accept it, society has convinced those people themselves that they are inferior. If someone outside of them criticizes them, but they have faith in themselves, they have the ability to cope with it. But to the extent that we've convinced people that as a consequence of their ethnicity that they are in fact inferior, if we convince those people that in fact they need some special privilege because they don't have it in and of themselves, then they have in fact, from my point of view, been victims of racism. So the part of racism that really bothers me, I guess, is this sense of self-expectation. And I think that's the problem that white people face today. I think that white people are beginning to feel themselves victims. When I look back at my life and I look at the arrows and slings that I've felt from other people, when I think about whether I've been lucky or unlucky, when I think about the way I've been treated by other people, bring it on. Bring it on. I've had a hell of a life. I've been exposed to anti-white vitriol by such vicious personages as Albert Liu, Jayant Bhandari, Maurice Jackson, all day long, bring it on. The thing I look for in the future, and I'd love Doug to give a talk about this next year, is the whole concept of files. This whole concept where, for those of us who have been lucky enough to be afforded the time to think and afforded the opportunity to be in the presence of others who think, for those of us whose circumstance is such that we don't have to react to circumstances around people's skin color by way of fear. Doug was talking about competition over a deer. That was a long time ago, okay? The world isn't short of meat. The truth is, if I shoot a deer and Albert can make my cell phone work, we can make a deal, okay? If I kill him, my cell phone will never work again, you know? I mean, this is insane. This is some part of Doug's strange past, his fascination with guns. So I just think for those of us who are lucky enough that we have the opportunity to think about topics like this and talk about them in sort of polyracial groups like this, that the right thing to do is begin to think of ourselves in the future and organize ourselves to the extent that we can into groupings that have more to do with beliefs and interests and trade, and less to do with damn near everything else. But one more time, okay? I'm an old, fat, white, bald guy. Y'all don't have to have a bake sale for me. Life is pretty good.
Great talk by all three. I'm going to save Doug his breath and just point out to Rick, the competition is no longer over deers, it's over waterfront condominiums. And he's still winning. And then something a comment on what Doug said about sort of primal reduction or racial organization in prisons. I also looked into it, and also saw or was discovered the absence of Asians in prison. But unlike Doug, I see that as an enormous problem, because when they start cracking down on anarchists, I'm going to have no group to run to. Okay, we'd love to take questions. If there, do I have a volunteer that could run the microphone around? That would be wonderful. Okay, let's start at the front of the room. Questions? Right here, sir.
Interesting comment. I could only talk about this here. Black is a color, it's not a race. Negro is a race. Can you imagine today me calling somebody a Negro? I mean, 55 years ago, I fought Golden Gloves. I wouldn't want to do that today, at my age. But Negro is a race, right? Black is not a race.
Well, of course.
I'm sorry?
Can we use the microphone, please?
You couldn't hear me?
No, to the people here.
Negro is just black in Spanish, of course. I guess it would be Negroid is the race.
I mean, there are Indians who are black. There are Hispanics that are black. Black is a color. It's not a race. I would only talk about that here, nowhere.
Well, we use white in the same way, though. Yeah.
You know, this is exactly why I think the use of the word white is erroneous, because white, all the way up to northern part of India, people are white. You can find people with blonde hair from Saudi Arabia and from Bahrain and South Kashmir. So the use of word white is completely erroneous from the cultural point of view. And that is why I said I don't like to use the word white. I should use people of European origin. And really coming back to Negroes, the word Negroes, blacks call each other nigger all the time. It's just that other people are not allowed to do that. Right, but that's the degradation that has taken place in the society, that other people are not allowed to use that word. And Negro is actually, as you said, a proper technical word.
It's an honorable race. Yeah.
Any more questions up front here?
Rick, you made the point that Africa's problems today were potentially caused by European imperialism. Do you believe that Africa today, modern Africa, is better or worse off than colonized Africa? And could you comment specifically on South Africa pre- and post-apartheid?
If I said that all of Africa's problems were caused by Caucasians and colonialists, I spoke erroneously. What I meant to say was that African leaders today blame many of their foibles on colonialism. And from my point of view, the worst of the colonial legacies is Marxism. There are certainly other problems in Africa: kleptocracy, tribalism, the big man complex, that mercifully for me, when I do business in Africa, have nothing to do with white people, which, by the way, Africans almost ubiquitously recognize, even the African leaders who understand that their demonization of colonialism is bullshit. They utilize facts for their own ends the same way that Trump and Trudeau do. I mean, the idea that there might be a difference between Zuma or Kenyatta or Trump or Trudeau is a non-starter. They're all political leaders. South Africa, I mean, I don't know where you're going with it. It's clear that the current group of black kleptocrats is obliterating at least the material advantage that South Africa had over the rest of Africa for a very long time, which is a pity and something that's recognized by an awful lot of black South Africans. The fact that in South Africa some white people deserve the appropriation that they're getting today, however, shouldn't be lost on anybody. The mining business in South Africa, when I first studied South African mines, was viciously and stupidly racist as a consequence of the fear of white people by being overwhelmed by the majority population, and payback occurring for the havoc that they wrought. They were really, really, really lucky. They handed off to Mandela.
We got a question over there in the back.
So I think it was Thomas Sowell who wrote Ethnic America. Is anybody else familiar with that book? But he made two statements in the book as part of his reason for writing it. And he's also black.
You're talking about Thomas Sowell? Or-
Thomas Sowell. Did I say
Okay.
that? Or did
We
I
were
say
just having
Edison?
trouble hearing you up here.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Sorry. Yes, Thomas Sowell. So the first was that stereotypes, which equate to racism now, had a purpose because we don't have time to stop and interview everybody and figure out whether they're people of character. So we have to base our judgments, our initial judgments, on something, and some other thing, some other incident has to trigger getting to know them better. So maybe in the same industry or someone refers you to them or something. But the other was that the stereotypes are actually based on statistics. So a couple of examples from the book. All cops in New York are Irish. Well, they aren't, but the majority are, or at least at the time of writing. And just sticking with the Irish are drink a lot. Well, actually, statistically, they consumed more than any other distinguished culture. But I wonder if you could just speak to this, to the other racist, huge racist issue in Canada, and probably the States too, is the First Nations. First Nations. So apparently they were called Indians because the people who first met them thought that they were in India. And so that's why they don't want to be called Indians. But the whole issue of keeping them enslaved as dependents is horrible, I think.
So, okay, so two topics. One, stereotype. The second would be sort of terminology. Rick, I guess I wouldn't confuse stereotypes with racism, even though that's done quite commonly today. Rick poked fun at several stereotypes on the stage. I sort of like made my whole reputation on poking fun of Asian stereotypes. I don't find it racist at all. And in terms of terminology, I think Doug referred to Orientals. That's not at all offensive to me, although some people would take offense with that. That's how my parents refer to themselves, even today. So, guys, stereotypes, any comments on that? Anyone? No?
Well, I think statistically, I completely agree with what Doug and Mary Lou is saying, that stereotypes is a product of statistically provided information to us. What people have to understand is that what might be factual in terms of differentiating groups is not factual when differentiating individuals. So it is completely, and that is bigoted when people apply the stereotype of group on individuals. The problem is that most people don't understand the difference, so they mix these two things together, so they end up being bigoted when they should not be bigoted, and that's actually, I think, a problem.
Yeah, this whole thing is part of the conquest of language by the barbarians. The NAACP, National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Can't say colored people, now it's people of color. Oh, there's no difference. It's just kind of showing who's boss. Orientals. That you're not supposed to say Orientals anymore because there was this Arab guy named Edward Said. I think he started this in about 1970, saying you can't say Oriental because that implies, wily and Byzantine and sneaky. The supposed vices of Oriental. So now you can't say that anymore. But of course you can say Occidental, which is the exact linguistic opposite of it. It's funny how these things change. Like Who is Russell Means, the famous Indian, American Indian racist. Interesting guy. He came to a couple of Eris meetings, and one point he liked to make was, well, when Columbus first arrived, he called the Indians because of Indios, with God. These people were almost holy. Of course, that's inaccurate, but he liked to believe it. I mean, he actually said that. He had, he was an evenly balanced guy. He didn't have a chip on one shoulder. He had a chip on both shoulders. But fun company. No, all these racial epithets and so forth, like Islam and Muslims. I don't say that. People that believe in that religion I should be called Mohammedans. You call followers of Buddha, Buddhists. You call followers of Christ, Christians. You used to call followers of Muhammad, Mohammedans. But that's politically incorrect. Well, screw that. I mean, I call them Mohammedans, and then if they want to have a theological discussion, I mean, this opens the door to it. I say, it's not potato. When you call a Mohammedan a Muslim or an follower of Islam, you're letting them capture the language. And once the enemy captures the language, and I'm sorry, sometimes these people are enemies because they're haters. They're race hustlers. I refuse to give them the ground and let them, win this subtle victory. It's foolish.
I was going with Doug until the very end, and then he screwed it up. I sort of think that in terms of engaging in dialogue with people, if you're trying to persuade them of something, you have to be polite. And if somebody tells me that they prefer to be called something, and in most conversations like this, you're trying to persuade somebody of something, why on earth would you piss them off at the beginning? I, not too long ago, asked a First Nations acquaintance of mine what he preferred to be called. I said, the words are different in the United States and in Canada and stuff like that. And I won't tell you his exact response. It was really profane. But basically what he said is, we're friends. You can call me what you like. But in other circumstances where a group of people feels, rightly or wrongly, that they've been unduly castigated by what's alleged to be the majority society, and they prefer some different sobriquet, I think that's great. I'm all for it. I don't understand why I would deliberately sacrifice my place in conversation out of some perverted sense of reverse political correctness.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. I'm usually not. I'm not looking for I don't get into arguments with people. I actually don't. I like to discuss things, but more importantly, it's very important. You're absolutely right, Rick. I agree about being polite and respectful to people. I think that's critical, but it's also very important to be honest. So you have to do both. You have to acknowledge both things. So I didn't mean to give the wrong impression. Oh wait.
Question at the back there. I agree with both of you, I think.
Jim, right?
Jim?
Oh, God. I'm so embarrassed when I forget somebody's first name.
Oh,
Please go ahead.
Doug?
Yeah,
Mike here.
Mike.
In your great spirit of fecal agitation, and in the spirit of Eris, I'm about to step into it. I offer for your consideration the following fact. Women do not exist, nor do men, or gays or straights or any number of genders. Blacks don't exist, nor do whites or reds or browns or greens, which seems to become a race. And Jews don't exist, nor Christians or Buddhists or any other religion. Only human beings exist. And everything else is a characteristic of that humanity. There is only one race, the human race. And it is character, not characteristics, that define a human being. So in our interactions, are we going to continue to fall prey to this ever-increasing range of identity politics that destroys our humanity, our individuality, and makes us categorize people like breeds of dogs? Or will we continue to see the individual human being with all of their characteristics and pass judgment on those characteristics? But remember, there is only one race, the human race, and character, not characteristics, define a human being.
No, I absolutely agree with that, incidentally. But it'll be interesting 100,000 years from now when hopefully humans have moved off the planet and out of the solar system. How many different species that may not even be able to mate with each other physically, forget about mentally, will have evolved at that point.
Okay, we're almost out of time. Maybe Jayant will come up here and make some closing remarks.
Thank you, Albert. So just to continue responding to what Mike said, I think that is a major mistake the Western society has made by accepting in these days of lack of wisdom that we are all the same. We are not all the same. Different societies, different cultures are so different that it took missionaries and European colonizers hundreds of years, and all they managed was a very small difference in Africa, Latin America, and the Indian subcontinent. So I think the problem really is that people, as my friend Frank Raymond was suggesting earlier, the problem is that people of European origin have a concept called compassion in them. Others don't get it. Others simply don't get it. And the more you marinate them in an environment of freedom, the worse they actually get. The crime problem among immigrants actually goes up in the second and third generation. There is a cultural problem and there is a racial problem. People are different. Unless we start to accept that, we are not going to solve the problems of the world. Of course, the Western society has destroyed itself. I think we should be closing, Mike. So I just wanted to say that as the closing comment. So thank you very much for this panel. We will be back here in half an hour. Thank you.